our English neighbours, are we?
No, or we're no more so nor less so. Our cousins on the other island have certainly as much a claim to their Celtic past, I think, as we have.
The murdered man from the Meath Bog reveals something of how the Irish lived several hundred years before Christ. Their gods were the gods of nature, whom they appeased with sacrifice. They had developed a social organization with kings at the pinnacle of power. Their artwork was delicate and distinctive, and they were already linked by trade to the cultures of the classical world.
Cloneycavan man and his contemporaries left no written record. Our distant ancestors exist for us as tantalizing shadows. And when the story of that ancient Irish world starts to be written, the narrative is scripted for us by others.
The writers of the classical world conjured their own stories of Ireland. In the 9th century BC, the Greek poet Homer described the whole of northwestern Europe as a land of fog and gloom. Beyond it is a sea of death where hell begins. But our first detailed account of Ireland comes long after classical Greece has been overtaken by an all-conquering new power. "750 years after Homer, the Romans invaded Britain.
Julius Caesar landed here on the Kent coast in 55 BC. Now, given his restless ambition, it would have seemed natural for him to complete the conquest of Britain and then move on to invade the neighbouring island. But in Caesar's mind, Ireland was a place of fearful myth. He called it Hibernia, the land of winter. A geographer living under Caesar's rule described the Irish as a cannibal race who deemed it commendable to devour their deceased fathers and who lived a miserable existence because of the cold.
But Mediterranean traders had long been immune to such dire warnings. And with the knowledge they brought back, a scholar created a geographical masterpiece. In this medieval copy of his book, Geographia, we can see how Ptolemy mapped the world as it was known to the Romans around 150 AD. And there, on the westernmost point, is Hibernia. This is the first map of Ireland and its peoples.
We can recognise some of the names. For example, Eblana is usually interpreted as Dublin. The river names, the Shannon is there, for example. The River Lee, I suppose, which all Cork people would like to see mentioned. There are some names, interestingly enough, here. We have Brigantes, for example, and the Brigantes over here in West Wales, and they are clearly related.
What does that tell us?
Well, it works two ways. Either it means that there were Brigantes here in the west of Britain, first of all, who then migrated to Ireland, but it is possible that they might actually represent population groups that originated in Ireland and then came to the western province of Britain, because you do have quite substantial Irish settlement in western Britain, in Wales, as we know it nowadays.
This notion of the Irish colonising parts of Britain, it rather turns our historical sense of things on its head, doesn't it? We always like to see ourselves as the eternally put upon,
could be problematic.
conquered by the other lot. We were doing
in
it
this day and age, we're insisting that everybody apologise to us, including our nearest neighbours. But I suppose if you go back far enough, we invaded them before they invaded us. So if there are apologies to be bandied about, we might take the first step, you know.
It seems the Romans did briefly contemplate an invasion until trouble in Scotland called the legions away. And so Ireland was never subordinated to Roman law or government. But they didn't need to dispatch an army to exert an influence that extended well beyond trade into the realms of society and culture.
This is a small bronze figure of one of the minor Roman deities. It was found in the River Boyne at Navan.
So this is pre-Christian, this?
This is pagan Roman. It's a bit like if Ireland was on the edge of the European community, you would expect that it would be trading with it. Ireland had cattle. Cattle would have been shipped over to Britain. Items like leather. The Roman army consumed vast amounts of leather. The cattle lords out on the Central Plains, they start getting notions of grandeur and they become the important provincial kings of early medieval Ireland. You have the establishment of dynasties that continued in power for hundreds of years afterwards. But again, they were looking to the Roman world to model themselves on the Roman emperors.
By the 4th century, some Irish outposts on the west coast of Britain had expanded into kingdoms as more settlers came. They desire to go eastwards, wrote an early Gaelic poet, into the broad, long-distance sea. A medieval scholar would later write that the power of the Irish over the Britons was great. And there's some evidence that Irish traders were venturing into the heart of Roman Britain. Here in 1893, in the middle of the home counties, Victorian archaeologists excavating the Roman town of Silchester made a fascinating discovery. It was a 4th century clue to the existence of a long-vanished Irishman. This type of inscribed stone is usually found only in Ireland or the far western fringes of Britain. These lines represent the oldest form of the Irish language.
Michael, what is this stone?
Well, it's a small Roman column. But what's very different about it is it's got this inscription on it, in Ogham. And this transliterates into a man's name, Tebicatus. And here on this line, he's beginning to describe his lineage, just as you'd find on any Ogham stones.
I mean, I've seen these, tucked away in graveyards in Ireland or in the middle of fields surrounded by trees.
Yes.
But here it is,
yes.
An hour's drive from London.
Away, away, away from other finds of such stone.
It's extraordinary to me, this idea that you have an Irishman who sets out, settles among people from everywhere, from all corners of the empire.
Yes.
It truly was a multicultural, multilingual world that he lived in.
Yes. And it's not just the one person, but it's a group, it's a family, and it's other people supporting a community. Now, it may be he was a big figure. He was a local king. I mean, who knows? Because we have another Celtic man from another end of Roman town story up in Roxeter who did describe himself as a king. So you may have had Irishmen who had his domain here in those sort of end days of the Roman world in the 5th, 6th century.
The Roman Empire in which Tebicatus lived was already in decline, but its impact was still profound. Christianity had become the state religion. Clerics were dispatched all over Europe to spread the word.
The faith that would come to be seen as a core part of Irish identity was brought to an island steeped in the worship of pagan gods. Rome's first bishop to Ireland was dispatched in AD 431. He was Palladius, the son of a Roman general, who found by one account that the fierce and cruel men did not receive his doctrine readily. His memory would be obliterated by events which would create Ireland's first and most enduring cult of personality. It is the story of a spiritual revolution born in an age of imperial collapse. Since the beginning of the 5th century, barbarian attacks on Rome had escalated, and the legions were called from Britain to defend the Eternal City. In the vacuum after the departure of the army, Irish raids on the British coast expanded.
The expansion was driven by a lust for plunder and by trade. And one of the most lucrative markets of all was slavery. From harbours up and down the Irish coastline, slave raiding boats set out to attack British settlements. But one of those raids would have consequences that the rough warriors on board could never have imagined.
For amongst the thousands carried off was a Welshman who would become the most celebrated Irishman of all. The St. Patrick we commemorate each March 17th escaped from Ireland but returned after a vision in which the pagan Irish called him back to spread the Christian faith. But much of what was taken to be the truth of his life was invented by others, like the 18th century clergyman who claimed the shamrock was used by Patrick to explain the Holy Trinity.
Patrick hovers between the pagan past and the Christian future. He is a man who vanquishes troublesome kings with magic spells, banishes the snakes from the face of Ireland. But what do we know of the real Patrick, beyond myth and symbol? What is his practical impact on Christianity's development here?
He himself says that he went where no man went before. It's a famous expression that survives down to the present day. And he clearly did go where no other Christian missionary had gone before. And that's important because in the history of the Western Christian Church, that wasn't the practice. People, generally speaking, didn't head out into the brave blue yonder because it was too dangerous a thing to do. And you certainly get the impression from his own writings that he was able to get on with the Irish to a degree which wasn't possible, say, for continental missionaries.
Patrick was not the Druid-destroying figure of myth. He left 2 documents, the most important, his confession, notable for its humility. I am a sinner, he apologized, the least among all Christians. It was these writings that would provide the later church with a vital unifying symbol.
At the end of the 7th century, the church has an interest in a far more stable society. The idea of a single island, and therefore a single people, and therefore a single nation, and therefore a single faith. Every other church could look back to the great converting saint. Gosh, we need to be as good as that. And it looked back to its origins and it had no documents, with one exception, and that was Patrick's apology. So that had to be carefully edited, and that becomes the myth of the great patron saint.
Patrick died around 460 AD. But there were other missionaries who blended Gaelic traditions with the Christian faith. Monasteries were founded. As a later Gaelic poem put it, heathendom has gone down. God the Father's kingdom fills heaven, earth and air. But Ireland was not luxuriating in a Celtic idyll. The early missionaries moved through kingdoms frequently at war with each other.
Tell me what happens when the monks arrive.
Well, they would have first of all made their way to the local king, the local lord or something like that, because you couldn't just arrive off the next available flight and announce, "Hi, I'm your new local Christian mission." You'd end up dead. So you'd have to get some kind of physical protection. Once you had the king's protection, on that basis go around, spread the message. Certainly with the passage of time, monasticism is the growing trend, if you like, and it's a cool thing.